The Pacers bounced back with a huge win in Game 3 to take a 2-1 lead. Their bench stole the show, with huge contributions from Benedict Mathurin, TJ McConnell, and Obi Toppin pushing them ahead. But I think the biggest factor was some of the adjustments they made defensively and how that allowed them to completely shut down most of OKC's offense. In Game 2, the Pacers had no answer for the Thunder. They started most of their possessions with Shea setting up near the logo, then they'd empty out the wings to take away help in the middle while someone came to set a high ball screen, which allowed him to turn the corner, play in space, and get to his spots. It didn't matter who was on Shea, who was defending the screener, or what coverage they were in, the Pacers got absolutely torched. He went off for an efficient 34, while 4 other players all scored at least 15, and that led the way in a 16-point win. This strategy was a direct counter to Indiana's aggressive ball pressure. By playing fast and turning the corner, he got deep paint touches at will, which then compromised the entire defense. And one thing I thought the Pacers should consider heading into Game 3 was to maybe get a little bit less aggressive on the ball, duck under some of those screens, and try to keep Shea away from the basket without bringing a ton of extra help. That's not what they did though. If anything, they got even more aggressive. Right off the jump, you're going to see Nembhard sprint into the backcourt to stick with Shea like a shadow. And I mean that literally. He's glued to Shea, not letting him move anywhere, and the result is an offensive foul. Then when Shea did get the ball, the Pacers continued to meet him with full court pressure. This is when the Thunder want to get to those high ball screens, only now Turner's getting way up in an aggressive hedge, while the closest help defender is aggressively playing the nail, not letting Shea attack the middle. Here it is again. Shea has to beat Nembhard in the backcourt, Turner's way up in a hedge, and when he attacks the opposite way, watch Siakam completely abandon Wallace to protect the paint. He makes the right read and the ball gets moving, but the message was clear. Anybody but Shea. They tried switching it up and having Shea attack towards an empty corner, but with Toppin jumping way out and angling his body to close off the lane, he's forced to go back to the middle. Then when he plays one-on-one, help is sitting at the nail, which gets him to settle for a step-back 3. When Hartenstein checked in, they tried to get Shea off the ball, but with Nembhard fronting the action, he isn't able to get to a screen, and when he rejects it on a cut, Toppin's ready to switch, again completely denying him the touch. This time it's just going to be a handoff, and again Nembhard won't let Shea create any separation to get the ball. That forces OKC to instead look elsewhere, and when it's Dort getting a handoff, they're just going to play him in single coverage and make him prove that he can get a bucket. Even if Shea was able to get the ball in these spots, it was the exact same thing with the aggressive help in the middle of the floor, every driving lane immediately being clogged, so he just wasn't able to get deep in the paint. Now compare that to when it's J-Dub running the point. Instead of a hedge, Halliburton's just going to soft switch, then he's left in single coverage with no nail help as he gets to a spot and rises up. Even when he was drawing that high hedge though, there wasn't nearly as much rotation behind the play, so if he could get the big to commit, Chet was left with a ton of space on the roll. With that said though, when Shea checked out, the Pacers shifted that aggressive coverage to J-Dub, and that's what we saw to open the second. Toppin jumps out in that high hedge while Nesmith protects the middle of the floor, and all of a sudden the paint's a lot more clogged. Here it is again. They go to that empty wing setup to create space for J-Dub, but with Siakam cheating way over while Mathurin forces the ball into an aggressive hedge, there really isn't anywhere to go, and he ends up with a pretty tough shot. Shea sat for 3 minutes, and during that time the Thunder scored just 4 points, all of which came on transition runouts. Not much changed when he came in though. They tried to get back to using him off ball, and on this one he actually receives a handoff with an advantage, but the Pacers wanted him to have to make tough reads, so they send the low man over early in an effort to bait the skip pass. Of course, they continued to deny the ball about as well as a team possibly can. And like I said, as long as they're able to keep it out of his hands, they can just play OKC's offense in single coverage and force those role players to prove that they're capable of scoring without an advantage. Needless to say, for the most part they weren't, so they still had to run most of their offense through Shea. And because Indiana wouldn't let him get anywhere near the rim, if he wanted to score, it'd have to come from much tougher looks. As a result, they turned to J-Dub a ton. Late in the second, we saw a slight offensive adjustment. They're going to have J-Dub run the point, and they're going to set up that same high ball screen action, except they want him driving towards Shea. That's because they know Indiana's looking to deny the ball, which means his man isn't going to help. If you're able to clear a side with no help, that's how you start to get some shots at the rim. This carried right into the third. After the break, they made a deliberate effort to lean on J-Dub, and he more than delivered. Time and time again, he'd run the point, they'd set up some sort of high ball screen action, and with Shea one pass away, he'd have a ton of room to attack the middle, where he scored in a variety of ways. Nemhard's never gonna leave Shea, so no matter how close J-Dub gets to him, there's no extra help. And when he's left one-on-one, that's when he can rely on his physical tools to generate good looks. There were a few times where they tried to go back to Shea, and they even tried different variations of spacing the floor. But it didn't matter what they did, the defense was so hellbent on not letting him find any openings whatsoever. Even when roles were reversed and J-Dub was the guy one pass away. They're not afraid to send Nesmith to the nail to turn away a drive, and remember, the low man's gonna cheat over early to force him into tough reads as a passer. Once again, that requires him even touching the ball to begin with, and it's hard to put into words just how impactful Nemhard was throughout the course of this game with his ability to fight through every screen, not let him get the ball, then force OKC's offense to look for other avenues, which simply weren't even half as effective. The Thunder had a counter though, and it had to do with shifting Shea's point of attack. If you remember the third quarter of game 2, they really started to run through him in the mid-post, and this was another way they picked apart Indiana's defense. The Pacers didn't want to leave him in single coverage, so their response was to send a double from the top of the key. That's a really easy passing read, so the ball immediately got moving and led to a few wide open threes. In game 3, they made a clear adjustment. Instead of sending a double from this guy up top, they're going to have whoever's defending the opposite wing commit to the ball. That forces him to make a tougher skip pass, and while this one led to a quality 3, that wasn't always the case. Here's another example where he posts up in a corner and the opposite wing comes to double. I want you to focus on Toppin though, because it's his job to zone up the weak side, and when Joe cuts, everybody's gonna shift one pass over. That means Turner's closing out to Dort while Toppin recovers to Chet on the baseline, and they scramble to near perfection on this one, resulting in a smothered mid-range jumper attempt from Dort. I think with more of a disguised, rotating type of coverage, you can target some of Shea's limitations as a passer. On this one, they actually mess up the coverage, and nobody drops to take away Chet on the baseline. This is a dunk if Shea sees it, but he instead falls back into a really tough shot. All that's to say, he wasn't going to find open space out of any action. First, it's a pick and roll that gets hedged, and Nemhard forces him to use the screen, where he tries to turn the corner but doesn't find an opening. Then they go to 5-out spacing for him to play one-on-one, and when he turns his back to the basket, J-Dub clears out from the strong side corner to eliminate that helper. Then that weak side double comes, and the only way he's able to get out of it is by drawing a foul. This was probably the first time all playoffs where Shea looked visibly uncomfortable. Not only did he have to expend a ton of energy just to even touch the ball, when he got it, he had little to no room to attack and only had access to really tough passing angles, which led to 6 turnovers for the first time in his playoff career. Real quick, I want to go back to game 2 just to highlight how big of a difference it was. A screen is set at the logo, Halliburton's picking him up at the 3-point line, and there's no help in the middle whatsoever as he easily gets to his spot. Now here's one from the 4th quarter of game 3. A screen is set at the logo, Turner's picking him up at the logo, and when he somehow finds space to drive, both Halliburton and Toppin are waiting for him in the paint. He makes the right decision on a kickout, but Dort's unable to capitalize from 3. Here's another example from less than a minute later. Again, both the screen and the defender are at the logo, and Shea somehow splits the gap on a drive. Look at how the defense is loaded up. Their only worry is not letting him touch the paint, and instead of kicking it to Dort in the corner, he tries to force the issue, where Nesmith sends away an attempt. So down the stretch, they turn to J-Dub to do some of their heavy lifting, and just like in the third, there wasn't any help in the middle, allowing him to get wherever he wanted to go. He scored 15 points in the second half and 26 overall, as his ability to get downhill and create was probably OKC's best option. However, in the last 5 minutes, the Pacers made a tweak to their defense. Now they're going to start showing J-Dub the same aggressive coverages they'd been showing Shea, with a high hedge, help waiting in the middle, and all of a sudden things didn't look so easy. After being their only reliable creator for 90% of the game, now they had nobody to turn to for consistent offense, and things kind of just fell apart. Indiana's defense completely took over the game in the last 4 minutes, not letting anyone touch the paint, not letting anyone catch the ball with space to shoot, and overall just bottling up every attack or action the Thunder tried to get into. When you pair that defensive brilliance with huge contributions from the bench and Haliburton's best game of the series, that's how you defend your home court in Game 3, and that's how you jump out to a 2-1 series lead. Typically, teams have their best defensive games of a series when the other team shoots poorly. Well, for the Pacers in Game 3, it was the exact opposite. This was actually by far OKC's best outside shooting night of the series, as they made almost 46% of their threes. What was different though was the volume. After attempting 30 or more in games 1 and 2, the Thunder only got up 22 in Game 3, which was a direct result of Indiana's defensive scheme. Most of their open threes come from Shai getting downhill and generating a deep paint touch. By completely shutting off those driving lanes and either forcing him to settle or get rid of the ball early, the defense basically never collapsed, which means that they didn't have to leave shooters. It's also worth noting that the aggressive ball denial helped take the ball out of Shai's hands more. If we look at the amount of minutes he's played in each game, he was on the court for a decent bit more in Game 3 than either of the 2 games prior. Yet, he touched the ball only 64 times after having it over 70 times in both games 1 and 2. When you limit Shai's ability to create, you limit everyone, and although J-Dub got it going, the team's offense as a whole suffered, producing just a 106 offensive rating, which is their second lowest mark since the Denver series. Of course, this begs the question, what can OKC do to adjust moving forward? Well, I kind of liked the idea of getting Shai off the ball, but I'd like to see him used more as a screener than the one coming off a screen. Remember, their main focus is denying him the ball, and Nembhard's not gonna leave. So by having him set screens, you're able to pretty easily create advantages and get higher quality looks. Another thing I'd consider is simply getting more offensive talent on the court. Aaron Wiggins was huge for them in Game 2, creating a bunch of shots for himself and scoring 18 points in 20 minutes. With the way Shai's being defended, a third perimeter creator to take off some of that pressure could be necessary, and he only played 9 minutes in Game 3. I understand the drawbacks with Wiggins defensively and how Indiana was hunting for him, but I think they can afford to give up a little bit on defense to get back to producing on offense. Because you could see how they were defending Case and Wallace in these minutes, and imagine what a more skilled ball handler and attacker in Wiggins could do. Even if it isn't Wiggins though, Isaiah Joe played just 4 minutes in Game 3. Again, defensive drawbacks, but this is somebody who has to be guarded at all times. And when you spread the floor with J-Dub on the wing and Joe in the corner, all of a sudden it's a lot easier for Shai to get down the middle of the paint. Lineups aside, as far as strategy goes, if you're still looking to go to those high ball screens for Shai, it seems to me like the only time he was able to get downhill is when they flipped the screen at the last second. With Turner getting all the way above the level in that aggressive hedge, by flipping the screen at the last second and attacking the opposite direction, there's no immediate help, which allows him to build up that head of steam. I also don't think it'd be a bad idea to go away from the ball screens though. This defensive strategy is pretty similar to what the Nuggets did, and OKC really leaned into early, top of the key isolations. Shai's going to be living from the mid-range, but with empty wings, he has room to get to his spots, which forces the defense to either give up an easy pass, outright trap him, or hope he misses shots. All things considered, this was just a complete defensive masterclass from the Pacers. They found ways to slow down Shai without giving up threes, and they completely bottled up everything OKC tried to do down the stretch. So with Game 4 on the horizon, we'll have to see if Mark Daigneault and his staff can make the right adjustments to avoid going down 3-1. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and turn my post notifications on to be first on more content. If you're interested in my more in-depth research, make sure to check out the Hoop Venue podcast and my social media profiles. You can find those links in the description. Feel free to let me know down in the comments what you think's gonna happen in this series. As always, I hope you all have a great day, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.